Hey guys, it's Tolan. Welcome to this first video in a potentially new series that we're going to try out. Today we wanted to try sort of a different format in the sort of the project scope. And that format was going to be the following. Um, there's a lot of questions that I've come across when trying to learn to program, when thinking about whether or not I should learn to program. There's been questions that I keep going back to, some questions that I get stuck on, and I thought it would just be interesting to try to start a conversation with whoever wants to participate around sort of some of these questions when learning programming, or really when learning anything, but today we're going to sort of be more specific to the art and science of learning to program. And we sort of want to look at sort of these questions, put a little bit of context around the questions, and sort of see what the community or what people out there might think. As always, we appreciate your feedback in not only sort of the topic that we're talking about and potential comments on that, but also in tips and suggestions of how we could make these videos more useful, interesting, or relevant to you. All right, so let's get started. I guess the question that I sort of got stuck on immediately after deciding that it might be possible to learn to program, or for me to learn to program, was what language should I learn first? And feeling a little bit uncomfortable or out of my zone of comfort, or out of sight of my sweet spot, which was maybe foreign languages when I was in school. I wanted to be sure to put a lot of thought into what is the best language to learn. And I actually became a little obsessed with that, so much to the degree that I had analysis paralysis, meaning that there was like way too many options for me to choose. And because there were so many options, I ended up not choosing, which sort of delayed the whole process of trying to learn to program. And I imagine that this scenario could happen for one or more other people in the world, of between 6 and 7 billion people. Some subset wants to maybe study programming, and so I imagine some subset might come across this question. So that's sort of the context of why I thought it could be interesting to start with this question. All right, so what is the best programming language to learn, whether that be 2019, 2020, 2030, but we'll sort of just look at it in the context of today. Today being, I actually don't know what the date is. I think it's like
April 27th, 2019, but please, you out there, serve as a fact checker for me.
All right, so now that we're hopefully over all of our technical difficulties, let's jump into what is the best programming language for 2019. First of all, I think that this is kind of a bullshit question. It's sort of posed in a way that it's framed so that there is a best language. Best means that it's superior to all other things, and I think like best is often contextually dependent, meaning like sort of the background and sort of the forward outlook really depends. And I think this is true for learning to program. So there are going to be arguments around this topic. Obviously, I'm not necessarily right, but in my opinion, there might not be a best programming language to learn. It would depend on a lot of things, but let's discuss some of those. So first, let's look at sort of some of the major options that we have out there. There can be company or process specific languages such as Swift or Go or TypeScript. TypeScript is a Microsoft language, at least I think it is. And so like if you know that you want to build iOS apps, then it would make sense to sort of potentially start learning Swift as one of your first languages, if not your first language. If you really want to work at Google and know sort of what in Google you'd like to learn or program or work on, Go could be an interesting language. So there are these kind of company and process specific languages that can be really interesting. Another example is if you want to sort of like work a lot with data or databases, like things like SQL can be a kind of a fun language to learn or start with. Then we sort of have what I think of as two separate buckets. There's languages that are sort of thought of as to be sort of more user-friendly for beginner learners, those without a math background or sort of without a programming background. These can be things like JavaScript or Ruby or Python. I personally have a little bit of experience with each of these languages. All the three of them, Ruby, JavaScript, Python, are all object-oriented languages, meaning that sort of everything or almost everything in the specific programming language is an object, and that has sort of different properties and features, and it's sort of the way the language is structured. Then there's sort of more traditional CS programming languages, or rather, in traditional CS programs like undergrad and grad, you might learn things like Java, C, C++. Although, sort of my understanding is that a lot of entry-level programming classes at a variety of universities are actually doing things like C and Python. So I know like Harvard CS50 does, you start in C and you sort of end the introductory course in Python. So there's definitely some options and variety out there. But if you have an inclination towards one programming language, I would encourage you to sort of explore that inclination. And it's not like you're a penguin. So penguins choose their mate for life, and then they're super committed that they just like be with that one other penguin for the rest of their life. At least my view of the world is, if you pick a programming language, you don't have to be like a penguin and be super faithful and monogamous to that programming language. Now, I'm not encouraging polyamory in other areas of your life. I'm just saying with a programming language, not only is it okay to learn another programming language after you learn your first or while you're learning your first, but sometimes it's encouraged, particularly if you want to be like a full stack developer, if you want to be even just back end, front end. There can be some major advantages to at least sort of knowing the basics or the notions of multiple languages rather than just one. So there's sort of arguments, but coming back to the point of like what is the best language, again, that sort of like really depends. So let's jump into what that might look like. Boom. And now we have all of them on our slides, which I'll be sharing. Because they're so ugly, I would love a designer to help me figure out how to make better slides so that the internet gives less crappy feedback. Not crappy feedback, but just, feedback that's like, you suck at life and design, never be a designer. I already know that. Like, look at my style. Anyway, so in three buckets, there's sort of the languages that are thought to be as the easy firsts, JavaScript, Python, and Ruby. There's the more traditional CS programming languages, CS degrees, which teach Java, C, and C++. Sometimes there's overlap between those two groups. And then there's company-specific languages, Swift, Go, TypeScript are just a few examples. Then we kind of get to the meat of the discussion, which is, which language should I learn? Or rather, which language should I learn first? Or which language would be the best to learn? And as we have here listed on the slides, I think that depends on a lot of things. At least it did for me. And when I was thinking about it, and when I talked to friends about programming, and maybe they're interested in making the leap like I did, whether that's through going back to school, going to school for the first time, coding boot camp, free code camp, whatever route it is, I like to sort of ask some of the following questions of like, well, what is your goal? What is the sort of the nascent desire or curiosity that is pushing you to consider whether or not you should learn to program? For example, if your goal is to get a job that pays a lot of money as a developer, then you should probably look for languages that have a high or interesting salary level. So I'm not going to name them because I don't want to get a lot of hate comments, but you can Google that yourself. You also don't have to Google it. You could Bing it, you could Baidu it, you could use whatever your favorite search engine is, and look that up yourself. But say your goal was to just like go into data science. Well, if your goal is to go into data science, then you probably don't want to learn something like C++, or Ruby is probably less useful. Maybe JavaScript is less useful. I think a lot of people that do data science, like, they might want to do things like Scala or Python has a pretty robust library, meaning there's like pre-built tools and sort of like things like add-ins that you can rely on so that you don't have to code everything from scratch yourself for the data science components. Another kind of major component that I like to think about when considering what is the best programming language for you or for me as a learner, first time learner, second time learner, whatever kind of learner you are. The second thing is sort of like, what is your timeline? Are we talking 4 years here? If you have 4 years and you're deciding to go to college and you want to do an undergrad degree and you're to study computer science, well, then it's probably going to be partially dictated by the program that you're in, the computer science department, or if you're learning it on your own on the side, that might have some implications also. But like, sort of what language you learn and sort of the level to which you learn or master the language will often be a function of time, meaning that like if you have 4 years versus like 3 months, like some of the common coding boot camps, like you're gonna have probably a different set of languages or a different set of options to learn, at least for most people, than you would if you had 4 years. And also just how much time do you want to dedicate, or might you be able to dedicate towards learning how to program or mastering how to program? If you need to get a job in like 6 months so that you pay rent, you might sort of bite off a smaller chunk than if you had multiple years or a lifetime. The other thing is, what's your background? So a lot of people who study computer science, maybe they didn't do that in undergrad or in grad school, but they had a math background, or they're like just naturally super linear and logical thinkers. Whereas someone else might be a little more all over the place, i.e. nonlinear, and it might help dictate just the art of simplifying things and picking a language like Ruby or Python, JavaScript. I'm not saying those are the best, but they seem like the best options for. I guess sort of the next thing that I like to think about is like, what is your actual interest level? So we've thought about what's your ultimate goal, or what are the subsets of goals that you have of why you might be studying programming or considering studying programming. And we've thought about your timeline, or you've thought about your timeline. You've reflected a little bit about your background, but now, like, what's your interest level? Like, are you really excited to learn programming and you just you're ready to go? Or is it like, everyone else is learning programming, so I feel like I should get on the bus? Those might have implications. So it's like, which language you pick. Like, if you're like all go and you like want the hardest challenge ever, then you might pick a different language. So I think of it as the sub buckets of intensity, duration, and sort of whether or not you have any personal projects or ideas that you sort of want to build out. People who have like web dev ideas sometimes tend to go for these like higher order languages, object oriented. Like, I'm gonna keep citing Ruby, Python, JavaScript because I have a bias. That's like all I know in life. Although I do hope to dig my teeth into some C and some Java in the near future. Actually, I had Java this morning, like 2 cups of Java. It was freaking delicious. Oh my god. Yeah, I had a little bit of cream in the second cup of Java coffee. It was great. But going back to programming, like if you want to build a web app, like Ruby is really easy, great for that. Python, you can use things like Django, like a framework. And JavaScript is like one of the core elements of the modern web, so why wouldn't you use JavaScript? Plus JavaScript is cool. You can use it as front end or back end with different frameworks and libraries and stuff. So anyway, I guess the next component that I like to think about and sort of discuss with people is sort of what process do you hope to apply, or sort of what are your natural personality or character traits? Are you someone who is super structured, and you have folders and subfolders, and they're alphabetized and maybe color coded and all of this stuff? Well, that's like very different than someone like me who knows dirty clothes is generally in that direction and clean clothes are over there, but like, you can basically tell how clean they are based on the number of wrinkles they have or the smell test. That's probably a bad analogy. You should not decide sort of what programming language you want based on your own approach to clothing, clean or not. But just some people are naturally really organized, and if you're not one of those people, sort of choosing one of the languages that is thought to be as easier is not a bad thing. So that's just a piece of advice or a thought exercise that you can try on. The next is like how disciplined. I think I spelled that wrong on the slide, so thanks for catching that before I did. But yeah, if you know that you have a lot of self-discipline and you're the kind of person who's like gonna get up at 5 every day, Monday through Friday, to like code for 3 hours before going to work, and then like code for 2 hours after work, you're just like freaking ready, or you're gonna quit your job if you have a job, like whatever. That's just something that you might want to think about before picking your language. Again, also, you don't have to think about all of these or really any of them. I just thought it was helpful when I was thinking about it, and sometimes when I talk with friends or family about learning to code. The next thing is sort of what I like to think of as access to resources, and this can mean like books or CDs. Who learns programming through CDs? I don't know, but that's the first thing that came to my head. No, but like books, or there are a lot of cool online tutorials and services that you can subscribe to. Code Academy, Free Code Camp, Udemy, LinkedIn Learning, which used to be Lynda. Oh no, 1 point something billion dollar transaction. Anyway, there's lots of resources. A lot of them are in English, so if English isn't your native language, maybe you want to find resources that are in your native language, at least for like the explanations. For example, I took some content in French, and I thought it was really cool, but I had to work a little bit more when learning to program in French, because French is not my native language, so that was fun. Also, this is becoming a really long video, so feel free to leave at any time. Pause the video, come back, get a cup of coffee. If you're me, go get some ice cream. I should really come back with some ice cream, but I already had some today. Anyway, but I don't just mean like physical resources, but sort of like maybe have access to people who have already started down the journey to code. Maybe there's a university or a community college in your town, or maybe you live somewhere where they call them not universities or community colleges, but there's a school, like a formal learning institution that you can go and talk to people with about it. Or maybe there's a cool startup that you know someone there. And anyway, so resources shouldn't just be thought of as books and tutorials online, offline, but also sort of like people. Another thing is like, I'm gonna bring up coding boot camps. Like, full disclosure, I did a coding boot camp, so yeah, I got my boot kicked, but it was cool. So anyway, that's like a valid option. I don't think boot camps make sense for everyone. In fact, I think they don't make sense for a lot of people, but I'm glad I did mine, mostly because I've met a lot of really cool people, and it was useful to have sort of a structured process. And I got to live somewhere else for a while, so pretty solid. But having access to resources and sort of thinking about what resources you might have access to can be a useful part of this exercise. The last thing that I wanted to put on this slide, because I didn't want to let it slide, was thinking a little bit about your own learning style. So, for example, I'm like an auditory learner, sort of an auditory thinker. I process information through words and sounds, whereas some people are like super visual, other people are kinesthetic, touch, Some people have to do things a number of times. Some people can do it on their first time. So just what kind of environment do you do well? Are you an autodidact, meaning like that you're a self-learner and you like learning things on your own, or do you learn through other people? So is it important to be in a classroom versus online? Does it matter if you have digital contact or digital relationships versus like primarily human relationships and human contact and exercise? Just like putting a little bit of thought into that can inform sort of how you think about learning to program, and also what is the best language. For example, if you want to learn some really cool sort of hot but niche language where there's not a lot of documentation, or there's a lot of documentation online but there's like no formal programs, no coding boot camps, no schools that teach this, but you're like a super in-person human contact kind of learner, that could inform like maybe that's not the best or the first programming language you want to learn. So anyway, these are just a few things that I sort of started to think about when learning to code. Maybe I didn't think about all of them. Definitely didn't want it once, but these are different elements that I've come across that I think can be helpful, or at least were for me. So we sort of wanted to look at these different elements. Maybe I'm going the backwards way, but yeah, that was a giant blooper. You weren't supposed to see that. I'm so sorry. But as you probably have guessed, I'm very far from perfect, which is great, because then, you know, anyone who's looking for Mr. Perfect in life will just not come knocking at my door. Fewer distractions, more times to program. Life is great. But anyway, I guess going back to sort of the first slide with the list of different programming languages, in synthesis, with 20 plus minutes of talking head, I'm getting ahead of myself. No, but seriously, I don't think there is a best language. I think it depends where you are in life, what your interests are, what your goals are, and I would just say pick one today and like stick with it for a few months. I know that like the way my story goes is I thought I would start with Python because it was potentially going to be really useful for my job in economic consulting. And it was kind of cool, but I like didn't really build anything with it. I just like learned some syntax and wrote a couple of like small algorithms. And eventually I just got really bored. Like the language was cool. It came intuitively-ish, meaning like the language itself, Python came a lot well, but like once we got to like conditional logic and loops and oh man, I was doing it on my own. It was just so sad. I was just so lonely. I wish they were there. So I kind of let it drop. Work got really busy and I just didn't, study programming for like 4 months. And then I came across Free Code Camp, or re-came across Free Code Camp and re-came across Code Academy. And I picked it up a second time, this time primarily JavaScript. And it was, like, I found it really fun. I found it challenging, I found it engaging. I like solving like the really tiny small problems, like, return the data type. Like, is this a string or an integer? And they're like, oh my gosh, this number has quotes around it and it's actually a string when I thought it was a number. Oh my god, mind blown. Or like the first time that you do get loops, like in JavaScript for loops, it's so freaking cool. Oh my god, it's really cool. And then you get into like tableaus, sorry, that's a French word. You get into arrays, and then you get into like key value pairs. It's pretty freaking cool, like when it starts to click. So this is just to say, like, I would encourage you to do things. One, just think a little bit. Thing one is think a little bit and reflect, and maybe go over some of these questions and reflect. But then just pick a language and just start moving. Because don't do what I did and hesitate for 3 months, do a month of studying, stop for 4 months, do a month of studying. I mean, do whatever you want, but I'm not encouraging you to make the same errors I made. So pick a language, and then sort of a second group of things that I would encourage is like, don't rely on one resource unless that resource is really working for you. So like, you do Code Academy is like, you're just eating it up. Keep doing Code Academy. But if you do Code Academy, you think Code Academy sucks, then like at some point stop doing Code Academy and look for other resources. Like I mentioned, Free Code Camp is, I think, really cool, but that sort of caters to my learning style. YouTube can be a really good resource, but it can also be like an infinite meta rabbit hole where you just lose so many hours trying to find content that may or may not exist, and sometimes people teach things that are incorrect, which is potentially what I'm doing right now. So, trying hypocrite right here. But anyway, just explore a variety of materials and also potentially explore a variety of languages. Like if you try out JavaScript and JavaScript's not your thing, maybe move on to Python, and then maybe move on to C, and you're like, oh my god, why didn't I study C the first time? Why did I listen to this guy on the internet? That's on you, not on me. Well, I guess it's on both of us, but onwards and upwards. So anyway, I'm gonna try to pause it here so that we're under half an hour, because really people can barely watch 30 seconds, so I'm not sure how I'm expecting people to watch 30 minutes. But for those of you that are still here, I appreciate you checking out this video. I'd really look forward to your feedback if you have any. And I'll see you again soon. So thanks for your time. And I think I need like a closing statement. Like, yeah, I'm just not feeling the inspiration. Yeah, go code. Always be coding. Code forever. Now, okay. If anyone has a great like motivational closing statement, that could be a cool comment to leave. So I'll leave it at that, and catch you later. Cheers.